President Biden delivering his third State of the Union address last night, touching on taxes, crime, inflation, and Ukraine. Fox Business's White House correspondent Hillary Vaughn, live from Capitol Hill right now with the speech details. Hillary, good morning to you.
Good morning, Maria. Well, President Biden opened his address talking about the state of Ukraine, not the state of the U.S. economy, and really didn't have significant time devoted to talking about the cost of living that is crushing families or what he is going to do to make things like groceries or gas less expensive. Instead, bragging about how great the economy is. He also talked up some tax cuts he's working to bring middle-class families while pitching new tax increases.
Does anybody really think the tax code is fair? Do you really think the wealthy and big corporations need another $2 trillion tax break? I sure don't. It's time to raise corporate minimum tax to at least 21%. So every big corporation finally begins to pay their fair share.
Biden did talk about the border, blaming Republicans for not passing the bipartisan border bill. On his way in, he saw Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who handed Biden a pin with Laken Riley's name, the Georgia nursing student killed by an illegal immigrant. Biden held up the pin and mentioned Riley, saying his heart goes out to her family.
Give me and any new president new emergency authority to temporarily shut down the border when the number of migrants at the border is overwhelming. Yeah. You're saying low. Look at the facts. I know you know how to read. He viewed it as a political win for me and a political loser for him. It's not about him. It's not about me. I'd be a winner, not really.
And Maria, Biden's address felt more like a campaign rally than a State of the Union speech. He didn't name drop Trump, but referred to him in other ways over a dozen times. And he was interrupted by Democrats several times with chants of 4 more years. Maria?
Wow. Hillary, thanks very much. Hillary Vaughn on Capitol Hill this morning. President Biden repeatedly, as you just heard, repeatedly mentioning former President Trump, but never by his name, only by his predecessor. Watch this.
Now my predecessor, a former Republican president, tells Putin, quote, do whatever the hell you want. That's a quote. A former president actually said that my predecessor failed the most basic presidential duty that he owes to American people, the duty to care. My predecessor, and many in this chamber, want to take this prescription drug away by repealing the Affordable Care Act.
Yes, it was all campaigning all the time. Joe Pinion, your reaction to last night's campaign speech?
Yeah, apparently my predecessor was the phrase that paid, phrases that we didn't hear much, anything about the Chinese Communist Party that has run roughshod all across the world on his watch. We heard very little about the fact that he did nothing while we saw Russian hackers take down our beef supply and then the Colonial Pipeline on his watch. And then he said Putin got the message right before Putin rolled the tanks across the border into Ukraine. So, yeah, much about the actual state of affairs in America on Main Street, the economy that's not working, and the border that has become a nightmare for people and states alike, missing from his rosy interpretation of what the last 3 years in Joseph Robinette Biden's America has been.
How does he not see that, Cheryl Casoni? How does he not see that he did not address the State of the Union at all? Talking about junk fees? Really? A woman was murdered by an illegal who came into this country in September 2022. He got Laken Riley's name wrong, calling her Lincoln.
Well, and that shows the out-of-touch part of last night. I will say that, yes, was it a campaign speech? Absolutely, because it came in knowing that his biggest weakness right now is the polling that shows that most Americans think that he is too old and too fragile to run or to even serve a second term. That's one issue. The other is that, well, he did address the border, but he deflected and he blamed the Republicans. And he said, it is your fault. There's a bill now. You've got to pass it. What he did not mention is he could, with the power of the pen right now through executive order, can fix the border. He won't do that, Maria. And then also, too, and I'll make this fast, but when that Gold Star father, and I know we're going to talk about it, when that Gold Star father started to yell and he got thrown out and arrested, that was his son died in Afghanistan at the Abbey Gate, and that was when I think this president lost the country and he lost our standing in the world.
I mean, look, this poor guy is yelling Abbey Gate so that he could get some satisfaction that the president mentions the botched withdrawal out of Afghanistan. What happens to him? He gets arrested.
Yeah.
He got arrested after the speech. That's disgusting. Alabama Senator Katie Britt delivered the GOP rebuttal after the president's so-called State of the Union address. Here she is.
Our commander-in-chief is not in command. The free world deserves better than a dithering and diminished leader. America deserves leaders who recognize that secure borders, stable prices, safe streets, and a strong defense are actually the cornerstones of a great nation. Right now, the American dream has turned into a nightmare for so many families.
John Lonsky, your reaction.
Well, foreign policy has been an outright disaster. I mean, Biden's energy policy has strengthened the hand of both Russia and Iran, and we see where that has led. On the domestic front, my goodness, the same misguided energy policy has pushed prices in general higher. We find that, according to the Wall Street Journal, about 52% of recent college graduates cannot find a job that befits a college graduate. In other words, they wasted 4 years of their time. So this administration leaves a lot to be desired. And by the way, without government support, the U.S. economy would be crawling along. Let's not forget, we're getting the jobs report today.
Yeah.
60% of the jobs, 60% of the jobs created since June were in government and healthcare. Healthcare, by the way, is heavily funded by government.
Yeah. And all of his bragging about the jobs he created are the jobs we lost during COVID. We're going to talk more about that coming up. We are just getting started this morning.